What's up guys, this is Ultimate Device Vids, and in this video we're going to be reviewing every iPhone model from the original iPhone 2G all the way up to the latest iPhone 14 models. So let's take a look back in time and see how the iPhone has evolved and grown throughout the past 15 years. So let's get started with the very first generation iPhone, the iPhone 2G. And of course, this being the very first iPhone, it was a revolutionary device at the time. It featured a 3.5-inch multi-touch resistive touchscreen display, which was far better than any other smartphone on the market at the time. Just with the extremely accurate controls and the ability to pinch to zoom with two fingers with ease, was truly an experience not like anything else on the market for a smartphone, especially when it came to web browsing in Safari. The iPhone 2G did feature the 2G Edge network for cellular data connectivity, of course, in addition to Wi-Fi when you're in range. The iPhone 2G has a 2-megapixel camera on the back. And if you go into the camera application, back then it was super simple. As you can see, there's no options whatsoever, no video mode, literally just the option to take a photo. We've certainly come a long way in the camera department on the iPhone. Both the iPhone 2G and the iPod Touch first generation at launch shipped with iPhone OS 1, which was a very bare bones experience. Of course, it being the very first iOS version. There was no app store, you couldn't download any applications. Basically, just what you got at launch was all you had. You couldn't even rearrange the home screen icons. There was no home screen pages, so definitely a pretty limited experience in comparison to what we're used to having today. And next up, we have the iPhone 3G, which featured a brand new plastic back design that was rounded. And of course, the iPhone 3G, hence the name, did introduce support for the 3G network, so the faster cellular data speeds. And a few other noteworthy features for the iPhone 3G was the addition of turn-by-turn navigation in the Maps application, and also push email support was added. And next up, we have the iPhone 3GS. So the S standing for speed. The iPhone 3GS was an incremental update over the iPhone 3G with a processor upgrade, in addition to a few other improvements and features. The most noteworthy of which at the time being the addition of video recording in the camera application. So for the very first time, you could switch to video mode and actually record video right on the iPhone. In addition to that speed boost as a result of the processor upgrade that I just mentioned a minute ago, other new features include the compass application being added, so a digital compass for the very first time, and also voice control, which is basically a very watered down version of Siri, which basically allowed you to use your voice to do things such as play pause, call certain people, go to the next song, just through pressing and holding the home button. And next up, we have the iPhone 4, which brought a brand new design to the iPhone with flat edges now and a glass back. And this was a total departure from the design of all previous iPhones before it. And it was the thinnest smartphone ever at the time of its launch. And one of the biggest features that the iPhone 4 brought to the table was the front-facing camera. So of course, in addition to just being able to take photos using the front-facing camera, this was the first iPhone to bring FaceTime as a result of that camera. Another big improvement that the iPhone 4 brought to the table was the addition of the Retina display. Now, this is something that I can't really show off on camera, but going from the display on all the previous generation iPhones to the iPhone 4 was night and day. The display was so much clearer, like you could actually kind of make out individual pixels when you looked at the previous generation iPhone's displays, but with the Retina display, everything just looked super crispy and clean. The iPhone 4 was also the first iPhone to feature an Apple Silicon processor, being the Apple A4 processor at the time. The iPhone 4 also featured an improved 5-megapixel rear-facing camera, in addition to a flash next to it for the very first time. Once again, in addition to that new camera on the front, the new camera being a 0.3-megapixel camera. And shortly after the launch of the iPhone 4, a pretty big controversy dubbed Antennagate by the press did come about. And this was a result of reports from iPhone 4 users that their device would significantly drop signal after holding the phone in a certain way. And I do remember noticing this issue, if I held my iPhone 4 in a certain way. So you can imagine this caused a pretty big ordeal, and Apple actually ended up giving a whole press conference on just this issue. And they offered all iPhone 4 owners a free bumper case that helped lessen the effects of the issue. And next up, we have the iPhone 4S, which, as to be expected, was a minor upgrade over the iPhone 4 with a processor upgrade in addition to a few new features. Very similar to the upgrade from the iPhone 3G to the 3GS. And this time, according to Apple, the S stood for Siri, as the iPhone 4S was the very first iPhone to bring Siri to the iPhone. I remember at the time it felt so cutting edge to be able to talk to a virtual assistant like this and have it actually give you full sentence responses. Siri did make quite the buzz around the launch of the iPhone 4S. Other noteworthy upgrades that the iPhone 4S featured was an improved 8 megapixel camera that now shoots at 1080p quality video in comparison to 720p in the iPhone 4. And of course, it also included a new processor, being the Apple A5 chip. And it also featured a readjusted antenna mechanism, and this remedies the issue with the iPhone 4 that I mentioned earlier, where gripping in a certain way would cause it to drop signal. And next up, we have the iPhone 5, featuring a brand new design with a larger 4-inch display in comparison to the 3.5-inch display on all previous iPhone generations before it. And in addition to that larger display, the overall design was also just quite different. The back is now an aluminum metal finish with some glass on the top and bottom. That wraps around to the sides, that same aluminum texture. The iPhone 5 is also the very first iPhone to feature the Lightning connector, as opposed to the previous 30-pin connector on all the previous generation iPhones. Also, you can see there the headphone jack was moved to the bottom of the iPhone 5 in comparison to the top, which is where it was on the iPhone 4 and 4S. And of course, the iPhone 5 did feature a new Apple A6 processor inside. As a result of the larger display on the iPhone 5 combined with the brand new design and the Lightning connector, the iPhone 5 felt like a big step forward for the iPhone. And next came both the iPhone 5S and the iPhone 5C, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But first up, for the 5S, this continued the trend of those minor upgrades for the S devices, with a processor upgrade in addition to a few improvements and new features here and there. And without a doubt, the biggest new feature for the iPhone 5S was the addition of Touch ID. So the iPhone 5S was the very first iPhone to bring Touch ID fingerprint unlocking to the iPhone. And of course, this resulted in the new design home button with the ring around it in comparison to just the standard button on all the previous iPhone generations. And as to be expected, the iPhone 5S features a processor upgrade, being the Apple A7 chip, which was actually the very first 64-bit processor in an iPhone. The iPhone 5S featured True Tone Flash on the back, which is actually one of the few differences in terms of just the physical design in comparison to the iPhone 5. And another new feature for the 5S that I remember using quite a lot around the time of its launch was the addition of the slow-mo camera. So now with the 5S, you could shoot 120 frames per second slow motion videos. I remember having a lot of fun with that. And this was the first time that Apple launched two major iPhones at the same time. So they also launched the iPhone 5C, which was basically just the iPhone 5 in a plastic shell. So it had the exact same specs, same Apple A6 processor. It was literally just the iPhone 5 repackaged in a plastic shell and remarketed. And it was sold for $100 less than the iPhone 5S. So typically, before this, Apple would often just sell the older model for $100 less than the newest model, but they kind of rebranded it and slightly redesigned it in this case. And next up, we have the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus, which featured major design changes. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were the first iPhones to feature larger display sizes since the iPhone 5. The standard iPhone 6 featured a 4.7-inch display, and the iPhone 6 Plus featured a 5.5-inch display. And these display size increases made the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus some of Apple's most popular iPhones, as around this time, people were dying for larger screened iPhones. I remember the very first time picking up an iPhone 6 Plus. At the time, I was using my 5S, and I just remember thinking how insane of an upgrade this was in terms of display size. I mean, the entire iPhone 5S fits just in the display portion of the 6 Plus. So at the time, going from a 5S to a 6 Plus was a huge upgrade. Even going from the 5S to the standard 6 was, definitely a big display size change. And both the iPhone 6 Plus and 6 featured a brand new design with curved edges, as you can see, in comparison to the 5S, and also a brand new housing with all aluminum on the back, and a slightly protruding camera for the first time as well. And there were some complaints at the time about this protruding camera, as it was the first iPhone to feature one, which is pretty insane to think about when you compare it to the literal stovetop design that a lot of us carry around in our pockets with the modern iPhone design. So it just goes to show you perspective is everything. We had no idea what was to come at that point. And as a result of a new NFC chip being included, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were the first iPhones to bring Apple Pay to the iPhone. And they also included some camera improvements, the biggest of which being the iPhone 6 Plus featuring optical image stabilization for video. And all around at the time, it just felt like the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus brought the iPhone up to par with a lot of the other competing smartphones at the time, just because of that drastic display size increase. And of course, they both featured the Apple A8 processor. Now, there was some controversy regarding the design of the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus shortly after its launch, as some reports of the 6 and 6 Plus bending in people's pockets started to come in. And around this time, Unbox Therapy uploaded a bend test video for the iPhone 6 Plus, and this video blew up like crazy. And dubbed Bendgate by the media, this concern of the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus bending got a lot of publicity around the launch of these devices. Now, the actual risk of something like this happening in day-to-day life was heavily debated at the time, but I will say this: my iPhone 6 Plus at launch was actually a little bit bent straight out of the box, and I did actually get it replaced by Apple for free, thankfully, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before or since then. And interestingly enough, a few years later, an issue referred to as touch disease began occurring for many iPhone 6 and 6 Plus users. And touch disease involves portions of the display not responding to touch and or a flickering line appearing on the display. Apple claimed this issue is a result of quote-unquote being dropped multiple times on a hard surface and then incurring further stress on the device, but I would not at all be surprised if this issue stemmed from the weaker housing of the 6 and 6 Plus. And I actually know a lot of people personally that have had this touch disease issue with the 6 or 6 Plus, so it was definitely a widespread issue. And next up, we have the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus. And as to be expected with the S upgrades, these were minor upgrades over the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. The main feature that the 6s and 6s Plus brought to the table was 3D Touch, which refers to a pressure-sensitive display, so you could actually press harder on the display to activate new menus on icons and in different scenarios. You could also peek into different things like links and messages just by pressing a little bit harder on the screen. You could even pop into it by pressing a little bit harder. And this was a feature that Apple actually discontinued with the iPhone XR and iPhone 11. We can only assume that this is just to free up space in the enclosure for, additional technical improvements in the iPhone. But I gotta tell you, a lot of people miss 3D Touch. I actually hear that pretty often. And the iPhone 6s was also the first iPhone to introduce live photos, which is that feature where you can press on the screen of a photo and it'll show you a little animation and a little bit of audio of when that photo was taken. Now, this was actually initially launched as a 3D Touch tie-in feature, because on iOS 9 on the iPhone 6s at launch, the live photos feature was actually triggered through 3D Touch by pressing harder on the screen. Of course, Apple later moved the activation method of that just to a tap and hold with haptic touch. But yeah, interestingly enough, the origin of live photos relates to 3D Touch. The iPhone 6s features an improved 12 megapixel camera with the capability of 4K video recording for the very first time on the iPhone. And they also bumped up the front-facing camera to 5 megapixels in comparison to only 1.5 megapixels on the 6 and 6 Plus. The 6s and 6s Plus also featured second-gen Touch ID, which was noticeably faster than the iPhone 6 series iPhones and the iPhone 5S. The iPhone 6s and 6s Plus also brought the Hey Siri feature that allowed you to, say Hey Siri without having to actually press on the home button, without having to be plugged in to power. Previously on the 6 and 6 Plus, you had to be plugged into power in order for that feature to work. And the iPhone 6s also featured an improved 7000 series aluminum, which fixed the structural issues that the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus suffered from. And many tests have been done comparing the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus's aluminum shell to the 6s and 6s Plus's aluminum shell, and the difference is night and day. The iPhone 6s and 6s Plus are so much more durable than the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. So Apple really did fix that Bendgate issue. And of course, the 6s and 6s Plus featured the Apple A9 chip. And the next iPhone to be released by Apple was the iPhone SE. So this is the very first generation iPhone SE. Of course, the concept of the iPhone SE models is to use an older older iPhone design, but place new internals inside. So this, of course, goes for a much more budget-friendly experience, but still something that's very powerful. So this was released at the time that the iPhone 6S was the newest iPhone, so it has all the internals of the 6S, but it's in the body of the iPhone 5S. Of course, it has the brand new Apple A9 processor. It also has a great 12 megapixel camera that's capable of shooting 4K. And if you're okay with having a smaller display and a smaller battery, you can get an experience pretty similar to that of, the newest iPhone, the 6S at this point in time, for a much cheaper price. And of course, the next major flagship iPhone to be released by Apple following the 6S and 6S Plus was the iPhone 7 and iPhone 7 Plus. And the 7 and 7 Plus feature a very similar design to the 6S and 6S Plus. As you can see, slightly redesigned back design and antenna design. And what the iPhone 7 is most remembered for is the removal of the headphone jack. So this was the first iPhone to completely ditch that 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, really pushing that wireless experience on users. Apple's reasoning behind removing it being pushing the iPhone forward and freeing up space inside the enclosure for new technologies. And as you can imagine, this caused a pretty big upset in the Apple community. And they also launched AirPods alongside the iPhone 7 as well, really pushing that wireless future all at once. The iPhone 7 also featured IP67 water splash and dust resistance, the first iPhone to officially feature a water resistance rating, and it definitely showed. The iPhone 7 was quite resilient when it comes to liquid and water exposure in comparison to any iPhone before it. This was really the beginning of people not really having to worry so much about minor water exposure. And the iPhone 7 also featured a solid state home button. And what that means is there's actually no moving parts in the home button. It's not even a real physical button. It's just a simulated button press with the Taptic engine when you press on the home button. Apple's haptics have always been next level, and this really shows, how convincing it is that most people who own an iPhone 7 probably don't even know that the home button is not a real physical button. And I imagine this is good for durability, as since there's no moving parts, it's much less likely that something's going to break in the device. And it's probably good for water resistance as well, as it's one less place for water to seep in. And the larger iPhone 7 Plus model was actually the very first iPhone to feature two cameras. They added an additional telephoto lens in addition to the main camera, which provides 2x optical zoom, and it also allowed for features like portrait mode for the very first time. And of course, the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus both shipped with the Apple A10 processor. And next up, we have the iPhone 8 and iPhone 8 Plus, and the iPhone 10. So 3 new iPhones released that year, of course the 8 and 8 Plus, and then the separate branch of the iPhone 10. We'll start off with the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. So these devices were a pretty minor upgrade overall in comparison to the 7 and 7 Plus. I think it would have been totally fitting to call the iPhone 8 devices the 7S devices. They did introduce wireless charging to the iPhone, and as you can see, there is a new glass back to make that work. And of course, they did feature the new Apple A11 chip. They also featured an improved camera, in addition to some other improvements here and there. But without a doubt, the headliner of this line of iPhones was the iPhone 10, released around the same time as the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. This was the biggest upgrade that the iPhone has ever seen at the time, and honestly, still today, I think the biggest upgrade ever to occur for the iPhone. The iPhone 10 brought a full screen, almost bezel-less design to the iPhone, completely removing the home button. This was the iPhone that brought about the current design language that we still have on iPhones today. The screen, being 5.8 inches, was the biggest display ever in an iPhone at the time, even bigger than the plus-sized iPhones, and that's because the bezels were completely trimmed off. The frame of the device was actually smaller, but the display size was bigger. And of course, with the removal of the home button, Face ID was introduced, so the face unlocking biometric mechanism, the technology for it, of course, stored up in the notch, in addition to the speaker, front-facing camera, and proximity sensor. And regardless of the full screen design, just kind of an overall new design as well, this was the first iPhone to feature stainless steel edges as opposed to aluminum, which was on all the other recent iPhones. The back design was redesigned as well. The camera now stored in this vertical orientation rather than the horizontal one that the 8 Plus and 7 Plus had. The iPhone 10 was also the very first iPhone to feature an OLED display as opposed to LCD display on all the previous generation iPhones. And the iPhone 10 still feels very modern in 2023. It still supports the latest iOS version as of recording this video, being iOS 16, and it's proven to run very good today, even in comparison to, the latest iPhone generations. So it's an iPhone that certainly stood the test of time. And next up came the iPhone XR, XS, and XS Max. So at this point in time, Apple is really settling into the routine that's still their current strategy, being offering a standard iPhone in addition to more spec'd out premium iPhones each year. The XR being the standard offering for this year, and the XS and XS Max being the more premium offerings. So starting off with the iPhone XR, this is the first non-premium tier full screen designed iPhone. So as a result of that, it shares similarities with both the iPhone 8 and the iPhone X and XS. Of course, it does feature the full screen design without the home button and Face ID with very little bezels. It is a little bit bigger of a bezel than the iPhone X, XS, and XS Max, but still a great improvement over the iPhone 8. However, it is an LCD display as opposed to an OLED display. The iPhone XR has a 6.1-inch display, so a little bit bigger than the entry-level XS, but a little bit smaller than the XS Max. It also features aluminum sides, which is another attribute from the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, and it only features one standard wide-angle camera on the back rather than the addition of the ultra-wide as well. But it does have the brand new Apple A12 chip, so the same one that's featured in the more premium XS and XS Max, and it's a very solid successor to the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, bringing some of those more modern design elements from the X, XS, and XS Max, but a little bit watered down to keep it more affordable. And in terms of the XS and XS Max, those were the successors to the iPhone X, so the premium tier side of things, and the XS Max being the first quote-unquote plus-sized premium tier iPhone with a massive 6.5-inch display, the largest screen on an iPhone by far at the time, while the iPhone XS remained at 5.8 inches just like the X. And of course, these also featured the Apple A12 chip, and other than the iPhone XS Max's large 6.5-inch display, the iPhone XS models were very minor upgrades over the X. I actually think this was one of the most minor S upgrades ever, and interestingly enough, it was actually the very last S upgrade that the iPhone line ever saw. After the iPhone XS all the way up until now, Apple has jumped one whole number for every single iPhone release, no matter how big or how small of an update it is. And next up came the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, and 11 Pro Max. Apple now adopting the word Pro to signify the more luxury end models. And starting off with the standard iPhone 11, a relatively minor upgrade over the iPhone XR, the most noticeable change being the addition of an ultra-wide camera lens on the back in addition to the normal lens. It also featured a bigger battery, leading to a better battery performance, and of course it features a new Apple A13 chip. Same LCD display, same aluminum sides and everything, just a few minor improvements. In terms of the iPhone 11 Pro and the 11 Pro Max, this was the introduction of the triple lens camera setup that we see on basically all of the Pro model iPhones to date, with of course a normal lens, ultra-wide lens, and a telephoto lens. Also on the 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max, Apple made the back this matte texture. It's still glass, of course, but again, a totally different feel. The Pro models also feature bigger batteries, leading to improved battery performance. And of course, the 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max also feature the Apple A13 chip, the same one found in the standard iPhone 11. All the same screen size offerings for all three of these devices, being 6.1 for the standard model, 5.8 inches for the entry-level Pro model, and 6.5 inches for the Pro Max model. And the next iPhone to be released by Apple was the iPhone SE second generation. As usual with the iPhone SE models, it was released mid-cycle in between the iPhone 11 and 12. And the iPhone SE second gen here came 4 whole years after the first generation, so quite a long wait for the second generation. And holding true to the tradition of the first generation iPhone SE, this device features the internals of the iPhone 11 series iPhones, which was the latest iPhone at the time that this device came out, in the same design as the iPhone 8. Of course, the main upgrade being the addition of the new Apple A13 chip, which again was the very latest iPhone processor at the time of this device's release. And yeah, it was great to see the iPhone SE updated after so many years without seeing any update, and it's always nice to see a more affordable new iPhone with, the latest specs get released. And next up, of course, we have the iPhone 12 models. So this includes the iPhone 12, the 12 mini, the 12 Pro, and the 12 Pro Max. And all these devices feature a pretty drastic design change over the iPhone 11 and all other recent iPhone models. The iPhone 12 models returned back to a squared-off edge design, very similar to that of the iPhone 5 and 4 design, as you can see. And in terms of the standard iPhone 12 line, Apple released, of course, the standard iPhone 12 with the 6.1-inch display, the same display size as the iPhone 11 and XR, in addition to a new 12 mini with a smaller 5.4-inch display, yet retaining all of the same flagship features with the full screen design and everything, just in a smaller package. And both the standard iPhone 12 and the 12 mini feature OLED displays, which is the first time that the standard base model phones actually feature that new display technology, which is great to see. All the iPhone 12 models also now support 5G, which is great to see. Apple also introduced MagSafe for iPhone with the iPhone 12 models. So basically, there's a ring of magnets underneath the back glass on the iPhone 12 models that allow a whole host of new accessories to work. Apple started selling a MagSafe charging puck cable, which basically just allowed a wireless charging puck to easily stick to the back of the iPhone 12 for easy charging access, in addition to a whole host of other third-party accessories and accessories directly from Apple, such as the MagSafe wallet, battery packs, and so much more. And of course, all the iPhone 12 models feature a new Apple A14 chip. And in terms of the iPhone 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, they all feature the same 5G connectivity, the A14 chip, and the MagSafe support. And in terms of things that are exclusive to the Pro models, they did get a new LiDAR scanner on the back, which allows you to create 3D models of spaces and rooms, which is pretty neat. And of course, just like the prior year with the iPhone 11 models, the Pro devices get that additional telephoto lens. And also, same as the iPhone 11 models and the XS models, the Pro devices have the stainless steel sides in comparison to the standard devices having the aluminum sides. Definitely goes for a very clean look with those flat edges. And the 12 Pro Max's display got even larger, it being bumped up to 6.7 inches in comparison to the 6.5 inches that it was in the 11 Pro and XS Max, making it an absolutely huge device, especially with the flat sides. It just felt larger. And speaking of display sizes, Apple made the 6.1 inch display size uniform for the entry-level Pro device in addition to the standard device. So both the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro have the same display size at 6.1 inches, while previously on the 11 Pro and XS, the display size was 5.8 inches. And next up, we have the iPhone 13 models, and this includes the standard iPhone 13, the 13 mini, the 13 Pro, and the 13 Pro Max. And for the most part, these were relatively minor upgrades over the 12 models, and the most noticeable change straight out of the box is the smaller notch, as you can see compared to an iPhone 12 here. As you can see, it's not quite as wide across, but it is actually slightly taller though. And starting off with the standard iPhone 13 models, both the standard iPhone 13 and the 13 mini had improved battery life as a result of a larger battery being included. They also both included larger camera sensors on the back, leading to better quality. Also a readjusted orientation. As you can see, they now go diagonal as opposed to vertical. And of course, they feature a new Apple A15 chip. And in terms of the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max, one of the best changes specific to those devices was the addition of a 120 Hz display refresh rate in comparison to 60 Hz, which it is on all the other iPhones before it and on the standard iPhones. It's one of those small quality of life improvements that definitely does make the device feel a little bit snappier. The Pro devices also feature improved cameras, and as a result, an even larger camera bump on the back. And of course, just like the previous few years, the Pro devices have that additional telephoto lens and now the LiDAR scanner as well, just like the 12 Pros did. And the next iPhone to be released was the iPhone SE 3rd generation, released just 2 years after the 2nd generation iPhone SE. And I think Apple's main reason for releasing this device so soon after the previous SE was to add 5G support, just to create that uniformity across the newer iPhones that they're selling, and also just to push 5G to more people. And just like the previous two iPhone SE models, it does feature the latest processor at the time that it was released, being the Apple A15 chip, which is the same processor found in the iPhone 13, but yet again in the body of the iPhone 8. So, the same overall form factor as the iPhone SE2, still that iPhone 8 style design, with the home button and everything, just with upgraded internals. And that brings us straight up to date with the latest generation iPhones being the iPhone 14 devices. And this includes the iPhone 14, the 14 Plus, the 14 Pro, and the 14 Pro Max. And in terms of the standard models, of course, we have the standard iPhone 14, and once again, we have that new iPhone 14 Plus, which basically is everything that the standard iPhone 14 is, but with that larger 6.7 inch display, the same display size that's found typically only in the Pro Max devices. So since the iPhone 13 mini and 12 mini didn't sell very well, apparently, Apple decided to go the other direction in terms of sizes and offer an even larger standard iPhone model, just to give users who want that larger 6.7 inch display the option of not having to go for the Pro Max device, as the 14 Plus is of course cheaper than the 14 Pro Max. However, other than the new 14 Plus display size, a pretty minor upgrade for the standard iPhone 14 models. The biggest features are crash detection and the satellite connectivity for emergency SOS. So crash detection will attempt to detect when you're in a car accident and then automatically call emergency services. And of course, we have the emergency SOS satellite connectivity that allows you to call for help even if you're not in range of a cell tower using satellites, which is a fantastic feature. However, only the first 2 years of the satellite emergency SOS feature are free. Then you have to pay a yearly subscription. And interestingly enough, the standard iPhone 14 models still feature the very same Apple A15 processor that the iPhone 13 models have. This is the very first time that Apple has released a major new iPhone and not upgraded the processor. However, the A15 chip that's now in the standard iPhone 14 models is the A15 chip that was in the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max, which means it has one extra graphics core. So it's a slightly upgraded A15 processor, but it's a very minor upgrade at that. The cameras are slightly improved as well, once again bumping those standard and ultra-wide lenses to the same quality as the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max had, but still no telephoto lens. So in terms of the standard iPhone 14 models, a very minor upgrade. And in terms of the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, there's definitely more to report on here. Of course, just like the standard devices, they feature crash detection and the emergency SOS satellite connectivity, but the biggest change for the Pro devices is definitely the dynamic island. So Apple finally ditched the notch design for housing all of the Face ID components and the camera components and replaced it with a cutout design like this. And they call it the dynamic island as they actually developed a whole host of software features to kind of work with the cutout. For instance, when you start a timer or have some sort of active activity, it'll actually give you updates as to what's going on with whatever task you're doing around the cutout. You could even press and hold to interact with whatever the task is. The Pro devices also received improved cameras, leading to the camera bump on the back getting even larger. It is pretty funny to think back to that report of people being upset about the tiny iPhone 6's camera bump when it was first released, just considering how large the camera bump has gotten on iPhones and how it seems to just keep getting larger each year. And the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max do feature an upgraded A16 chip. So the Pro devices did get a processor upgrade, but the standard devices did not. And there you guys have it. That's every single iPhone generation that's been released so far. We've certainly come a long way in 15 years. Let me know down below in the comments section which of these iPhone models is your favorite. Also, if you're an iPhone user, let me know the first iPhone model that you used. My first iPhone was the 3GS. I got it around the time that the 4S was the newest iPhone, and having had an iPod Touch for a few years leading up to buying it, getting the iOS experience on a phone was truly incredible. In terms of my favorite iPhone, I'd say the 5S. Not only was the 5S a super refined device, but also the 5S was released the same year iOS 7 was released, which was the first iOS version to feature flat design language, which is the design language that we're used to seeing today in iOS. This was quite the departure in comparison to iOS 6 and earlier's skeuomorphic design with lifelike elements. As a result of this huge change, it was a really exciting time in the iPhone community. So I have a lot of good memories with the 5S and iOS 7. But alright guys, that just about wraps it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.